is that a dad joke?
What do you mean? How's it not a dad joke?
Anyone that's a dad that tells a joke.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh.
I mean, like, this is episode 33, and today we were talking about if early retirement is a bad idea, if art is a legitimate asset class, and we have more lightning round questions at the end. In a recent article published on CNBC, economics professor Lawrence Kotlikoff argues that retiring early may be one of the biggest mistakes people can make because, on average, they simply can't afford it and must significantly reduce their living expenses despite still being healthy enough to work. Do you agree with this, Drew?
Sort of, I guess. I'll quote Gandalf from Lord of the Rings here. A wizard is never late, nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to. This is kind of how retirement should be. Retiring early is relative. Anyone can retire right now if they actually wanted to. Question is, are you going to like it or not? Are you going to be able to sustain it? And is it going to be worth it? Right now, I could probably sell all of my assets. I could move into a tent and eat Alpo and probably keep myself alive, but it would be a very bleak retirement. I wouldn't like it, but I would be retired. Now, obviously, I'm being a bit facetious, but I'm trying to emphasize the importance of considering your standard of living in retirement and not just age or income. There's a lot of retirement calculators out there on the internet that can help you determine what retirement looks like based on your assets, your current income. But the first thing that you should do, or at least one of the first things you should do when planning for retirement, is to paint that picture of your retirement. What does it look like? Are you spending time with family? Are you traveling? Are you spending time doing hobbies? And how much of all of that, how much is that going to cost per year? And it's pretty simple. If your standard of living is going to be below what you want, you ought to keep working until you're able to meet it, or make peace with the lower standard of living.
Alex?
Yeah, I think that's all pretty good advice. My initial knee-jerk reaction is, what are you kidding? Everybody, who wouldn't want to retire as early as they could? But the article was targeting specifically, I think, baby boomers, who as a generation, sorry if this offends anyone, but have been god-awful savers. The numbers were pretty bleak. The average or the median wealth of baby boomers, so that's assets minus debts, is just $150,000, and there aren't too many young baby boomers left. So yeah, I do think that maybe younger baby boomers and even some early Gen Xers may want to pull up some of those retirement calculators and start looking at what retirement's going to look like, especially if they plan to live into their 90s. Because the longer you plan on living, the more money you're going to need, and Social Security and 150K net probably isn't going to do it. So I would just again second a lot of what Drew said. If you've had a retirement plan your whole life and you've executed it and you're like 50, 55 and you want to get out of the labor force, you're not going to have to take a big hit to your standard of living. Just go ahead and get out. If you can't afford it, if you're basically going to be living in a one-room apartment for the rest of your life because that's all you can afford, and maybe you should consider keeping on working.
I live in a social bubble where most of the friends that I have, they could have retired a few years ago if they wanted to, but they continue to work because they found that sweet spot between work and play. And they're saying, man, I'm making more money now than I ever made as a young person. Why would I ever give this up right now? And they're really good at what they do. So they can work as much as they, or as little as they want, and life is rather good. I think that our culture has somehow convinced us that doing nothing except goofing off is a wonderful thing to shoot for and aspire to. But the reality is they've done lots of studies on this, and people, they generally have more positive mental health when they have a good reason to wake up every morning. And for a lot of folks, what they contribute to society is what they do when they actually work. When people stop giving to humanity, there's an empty hole in their soul. So yes, there certainly is a financial component of retiring, but there's also a mental component of retiring. And even though I'm could have retired several years ago, I like what I'm doing. And as I transition out, it's not like I'm transitioning to the golf course. I'm just going to transition to doing other things, and some of them will make money and some of them won't. But I think that retirement is one of those things. It's better to retire towards something than it is to retire away from something. And I think a lot of the reasons why people come in wanting to retire early is because they're retiring away from something. If work is so distasteful that you want to get away from it as rapidly as possible, you ought to be looking to do something else.
The article the article that Lawrence Kotlikoff wrote specifically was looking at, he wasn't looking at so much like the FIRE movement. It was more, I'm going to retire at age 55. And one of the biggest issues is that you just cut it off at age 55. You hate what you're doing. You're done with it. And you decide that, whatever even if I have like a meager existence, I can't stand, showing up one more day at my job. So I'm just going to be done. And that's fine. And I guess one of the things that the article doesn't talk about is that, a lot of people, they're retired, like kind of like Joe said, they're retired for 3 months. And then they're like, well, this has been great, but now I'm kind of bored. And a lot of times they end up doing something else. And so, yes, if you're 55 and you have, little in the way of assets, then it's going to be a problem. And what the bigger problem is going to be, you're probably going to be fine for the first 10 years. But if you're completely out of the workforce for 10 years and then you decide you need more money, the issue is that your job skills have deteriorated and you're not as hireable as you were when you just got out of the workforce at 55. So that's an issue, and your health is not as good, but you need money more than you did 10 years ago. So that's something when people are going to retire and they don't have a lot of assets. One of the biggest things that's going to help them is if they get a part-time job. And there's a lot of part-time jobs out there that are fairly enjoyable, or at the very least they're not horrible to show up to every day. When I was in high school, I worked at the golf course, and there was a lot of older gentlemen who would drive golf carts and kind of help out around the golf course and get a paycheck. And they didn't really need the money, but A, it gave them something to do, and B, it just kind of padded their bank account in the event that they needed something. So the biggest thing on here is that if you are going to retire early, or the biggest thing in my opinion is that if you are going to retire early and your assets are limited, it's best to have some sort of part-time job lined up that'll take pressure off that portfolio. And the other biggest thing that this article did mention is that waiting even 2 years, according to the article, really made a big difference in the retirement. And I will 100% agree with that. I've been doing a lot of retirement planning in our software lately. And if people want to retire at age 55 and we change the retirement date to age 57, that additional 2 years makes a huge difference in terms of how much pressure you're putting on your portfolio in retirement. So also, if you have limited means, the next thing you can do is just, if you can, make it additional 2 years and then retire, because it does make quite a big difference.
One of the things the article pointed out too was people are retiring early, not only early, but when they're able-bodied.
Right.
It might be a good idea just to consider the fact that if you did retire too early, you better be sure you have enough in case you do become disabled and you can't go back into the workforce.
Right. According to the Art Price 100 Index, which tracks the 100 most important artists in the art market, art has outperformed the S&P 500 by 250% between 2000 and 2018. Do you think this makes art a legitimate asset class, and should it be included in retirement as part of retirement portfolios?
I don't think it should be its own asset class. I think it makes a fine addition to the alternative asset class. It's kind of like putting a crushed pepper on your salad. It makes a really great addition to it, but you're not just going to eat a bowl of pepper. Art can certainly add value to a diversified portfolio. The problem with art is it's pretty illiquid. You can't sell a piece of your art painting to generate some cash. So you want to be properly diversified. Just go back to the basics. You want quality, you want diversification, you want appropriateness. If your portfolio is completely diversified and you've been following all the steps, yeah, you can add a little art to your portfolio, but it shouldn't be the main act.
So I'm gonna come back and say, so I think Drew's a little out of date on his art investing methodology, because I've been seeing ads on YouTube videos and whatnot for securitized art, where you buy and sell pieces of artwork, little chunks of it, 1/1000th or whatever of art from artists like Banksy or other modern artists. I mean, it's kind of interesting. I count me among the skeptics. I'd be curious to see how many people may actually make any money versus how few. I know that. So the data for crypto day traders is pretty grim. It's like 95 to 97% either lose money on their investment or make less money after capital gains taxes than federal minimum wage. I'd be curious to see what that is for securitized art investments. Anyways, I guess you'd have to define the term legitimate. I mean, if you want to invest in it and it's not a total scam, then maybe it is legitimate. Wealthier people have invested in artworks for a long time, and I don't think that's going away anytime soon. Kind of like Drew said, if you want to put 1 or 2% of your portfolio towards it, why not? Otherwise, don't pump any money into it that you can't afford to lose.
I think art is one of those niche markets where the people who make the most money investing in it is like 0.1% of the people who actually engage in it, like stamp collecting or coin collecting and those sorts of things. They have a certain value that goes above and beyond just, man, that's a really nice painting. And the people who actually know quality when they see it, they know marketability when they see it, they have a gift or a skill that is in high demand. But I think those numbers are really small. I think for the average Joe six-pack who wants to invest in a portfolio to secure his future retirement, unless art is their thing, probably should stay away from it. The one exception, I haven't seen it show up in our SSR single sector rotation strategy yet, but if there was an exchange traded fund operated in the top 5 percentile relative to every other industry, and it was invested in art, I'd ride that momentum, and I probably would invest it, and I'd get out of it as soon as the momentum left it, just like we do with the other investment strategies that we do. But I haven't seen art show up in those sorts of venues yet. But for the most part, I don't think I'm going to be buying art anytime soon as an investment, because I just don't think I'm skilled enough to do it and do it well.
Yeah, the Art 100 index is, when I read, so the art price 100 index, I went onto their website, and basically it tracks the 100 most important artists. And this is kind of like reading like IRS code. It's like, what is define important artist. So you go define important artist, and that artist, like every year, they reevaluate the 100 most important artists, and then they adjust the index to only include, to exclude irrelevant artists. Similar to what the S&P 500 does when they go through and evaluate companies that are part of the S&P 500. And I think there's a huge difference between how the S&P 500 evaluates companies that qualify to be one of the 500 biggest U.S. companies, and who are considered to be 100 of the most important artists. So I think this data is, while they're true, like if you get like a Van Gogh, which I don't know anything about art, but I'm pretty sure that's probably going to be in there for a while. Of course, they're going to appreciate and value over time. But if you look at the art price global art index, it's actually underperformed pretty significantly in the last 3 years. And so two big things are, one is that how do you tell who are going to be the most important artists? Because in the S&P 500, we can tell who the biggest companies are because we can tell on their balance sheet, which is the same for everybody, how much money they make. And in a very objective way, we can kind of tell is your company making money or is it not? Whereas so I'm looking at a bunch of lines on a paper that sometimes it looks like a broom, sometimes it looks like a horse's tail. I can't decide if somebody's going to like it, next year versus this year. So it's one of those things where like, I kind of think it's a luxury asset class, whereas that, if you have, $1 million stocked away in your 401k, you have $1 million in real estate, and you have a bunch of emergency savings sitting around, and you have rental income coming in, and you want to go out and buy a $5,000 picture of Jackie Chan karate chopping a table in half and put it in your basement and watch it appreciate in value, I say go for it. But kind of like Joe's point is that you got to know what you're doing, and then it's just like buying gold. Is that like people's opinion of what you own could change overnight, and then pretty soon it could be worthless. And
well, the thing about gold is it's not like Hunter Biden or Dennis Rodman creates it. So it's like quite possibly some artist 10 years from now, they may not be as attractive just because of who they are.
Yeah.
So, Van Gogh, he's already dead. So that's why his paintings go for $1 million. But some of these contemporary artists who might be going for $1 million today, we have absolutely no idea what kind of lifestyles they're living that will show up on the front page of the Washington Post, which will render your holding worthless, 10 years from now.
Right. It's kind of like collecting, old cars. Like, a lot of people say that, old cars are great investments, and you're right, some of them are. And, but the ones that are going to retain their value are unaffordable to most people. Like if you're going to buy like a Van Gogh painting, like, get ready to like start, bidding at like $500,000 or something like that. I mean, you got to be, you got to have a lot of money laying around that you can't do anything else with. But that said, is that if you are in that position, like I went to school at the University of North Dakota, and they built a $100 million hockey rink for the hockey team there. And the reason that I was told that they built it is because Ralph Engelstad, who owned a bunch of casinos in Vegas, needed a tax write-off for that year. So he went ahead and built a $100,000 ice rink for him. And it's kind of the same thing with art, is that it's like you need something, and you don't want to put it in because you have enough traditional investments. You want something that's going to be a store of value, then sure, buy art. But for most people, it's not going to be an asset class. Even if you can buy small shares of the portfolio, I wouldn't start there.
I think people that invest in art, it's kind of where the investment world and your hobby and your passion overlap. I don't think you're just going to go out looking for art because all of your other bases are covered and you're doing fine. I think you legitimately have to love the art.
Yeah.
If you are going to do it, buy something that you really don't mind looking at. If you don't want to see Jackie Chan karate chopping a table for the next 20 years, you probably ought not to invest in that piece of art.
Don't go in my basement. All
I'm
right.
more of a Bruce Lee guy.
All right, move on to the lightning round for today. So the 4-day work week has been growing in popularity, is believed to make employees happier and more productive. Do you think this will become the new normal over the next 5 years?
I think it's going to become more normal. I think employers are trying to attract employees, and it certainly does make them happier on paper. So yeah, I think it'll be the norm.
Over the next 5 years, I don't know. I think a lot of companies are still struggling to comprehend the mass work from home. But like you alluded to, every study that's ever been done shows 4 9s or 4 10s. Doesn't diminish productivity. Worker outcomes are better. They're happier. They don't quit as much. I think eventually it'll become the norm.
I think people who are incredibly productive will have the opportunity to work a 4-day work week, and people who are below average in productivity will probably hold 2 4-day work weeks.
I think it depends on the industry too. Is that it would be hard for our office to do a 4-day work week because we'd either have to like rotate or something like that. But the service industry, it's kind of hard for. Doctors, it's kind of hard for. Nurses, it's kind of hard for. I mean, they probably already do it because they have enough staff to work 4 days and have people fill into them. But for smaller businesses, it's a little bit harder because you got to be there most of the time. You can't just work 4 days and be like, hey, we took Friday off. Too bad, so sad. So I think. In bigger corporations, it might be adopted, but I think for these smaller businesses, I think it's still a ways off.
Well, I think if you hire really, really good employees, you can take a 3-day work week.
That's true. All right, so the next question is, I had no idea that this was actually going on, but apparently yesterday the Senate passed a bill to make daylight savings time permanent. And the question I was going to ask is, do you think daylight savings time is even still necessary?
I don't think it's necessary. From what I've read, it was to save energy costs, right? You use less electricity by it staying lighter longer. I guess there's been some studies where you could make the case that you use more electricity because you turn on the air conditioning more and you use more other electronics while you're up. But it in a nutshell, I don't really care. I don't care if they keep it or they go back to daylight savings time. It's not a big thing for me.
I think most of the data shows that it's kind of a wash for like energy use and car accidents and all that other stuff. But the polling data is kind of interesting. 63% of Americans do not want to change clocks anymore. And when polled, pluralities or outright majorities of every age bracket and political affiliation want permanent daylight savings time. 30 out of 50 states have passed legislation petitioning the feds for permanent daylight savings time. This, including Montana, which happened last year. I think the House is going to pass it and Biden's going to sign it. We're going to be on daylight savings time permanently. As for whether it's necessary, don't know, but I prefer it to standard time. I like the extra hour of sunlight in the afternoon.
If you ask people in positions of authority the reasons why we have daylight savings time and they can't articulate why, it's not necessary. It's long past its usefulness. If we don't even know why we're doing it today, it's unnecessary. I'd say no.
I thought it was to give farmers like more light in the morning and the evening. I can't remember which one, so you can, I don't know. Not that they probably didn't matter. They probably just went out there and worked when it was light anyway. So that probably.
It's not like they go up and they adjust the sun.
Yeah.
And the sun somehow is changed.
It just hurts more when you're getting up at 6 instead of 7.
Yeah.
It really is. It's an urban requirement more than a rural requirement, and it just doesn't make that big of a difference because the way we live our lives, it's just not necessary.
Well, I say for people with small children, Alex seemed to have a decent time with his kid, but my kids, they're bound. It's like 8 o'clock, it's bedtime, but they're in there bouncing off the walls. So, as a parent, I'm all for just picking a time and sticking with it. I don't even care which one. All right, the last question is: all of us here are dads. So, what is your favorite dad joke?
I don't have a prop for this one, but it involves a step ladder. You say, "This is my step ladder. I never met my real ladder."
Well, Alma, my only child, is not old enough to even get dad jokes yet. And a lot of them that I know probably shouldn't say, but one of my favorites is, so did you hear about the restaurant on the moon? The food's supposed to be really good, but there's just no atmosphere.
I guess the one I heard was the kids playing on the playground. And he goes, "Well, if I'm lying, then my dad will drop dead." And when he gets home, his mother's crying. He said, "What happened?" He said, "The milkman died."
Man. All right. Oh, that's
Dark.
All right. So mine is that what do you call an alligator with an investment account? It's an investigator. It's an alligator.
How is that a dad joke?
What do you mean? How's it not a dad joke?
Anyone that's a dad that tells a joke.
Yeah. I'm a dad who just told a joke. I guess if you want to go like legitimate dad jokes, every time my kids are like, "I'm hungry," I always introduce myself as dad and "Hi, hungry. My name's Dad. It's nice to meet you." And then I dismiss them. So that's probably my favorite.
Dad, I'm serious. I thought you were hungry.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No, nobody thinks it's funny, but they get the point that I.
Yeah.
All right, that's it for episode 33.